History claims that civilization began 6,000 years ago. It claims that ancient man was primitive and that the map of the world was only filled in by brave explorers in the last few centuries. Specifically, it claims that Antarctica was discovered in January 1820. Before that date, the bottom of the world was a mystery. But if that is true, then why does this exist? Why does a map, signed and dated in 1513, 300 years before discovery, show the continent of Antarctica in perfect detail? Hidden in the Vatican archives, there are maps that show rivers in the Sahara and mountains that modern science didn't find until 1958. Here are the 5 maps that broke the timeline. To understand the lie, we have to start with the artifact that started the controversy. In 1929, historians found a gazelle skin parchment rolled up on a dusty shelf in Istanbul. It was signed by Piri Reis, a legendary admiral of the Ottoman Navy, and dated 1513 AD. At first, it looks like a standard naval chart, but when historians analyzed the southern section, they realized this wasn't just a map, it was a threat to the official history of the world. The map traces the coast of South America, goes down to Tierra del Fuego, and then turns east. It connects perfectly to a coastline that matches Queen Maud Land, Antarctica. Here's the problem. Today, Queen Maud Land is buried under a mile of solid ice. It has been buried for 6,000 years. But Piri Reis didn't draw the ice, he drew the physical landmass underneath. He drew bays, rivers, and mountain ranges where today we see only a frozen wasteland, 6,000 years before Google Earth existed. This is where the Vatican's timeline begins to crumble. In 1513, the Church controlled the narrative of human history. They taught that civilization was young, that the Great Flood wiped out everything, and that the world was only truly discovered by Europeans blessed by God. But this map proves that someone was surveying the planet with satellite-level accuracy thousands of years before the Bible says civilization even existed. The United States Air Force confirmed it. In 1960, they analyzed this map and stated in an official letter, "The geographical detail agrees remarkably with the seismic profile. This indicates the coastline had been mapped before it was covered by the ice." But the military wasn't the only one involved. Even Albert Einstein got involved. When Professor Charles Hapgood first proposed that this map proved an advanced ancient civilization, he was ridiculed. So he sent his work to Einstein. And Einstein didn't laugh. He wrote back stating that Hapgood's theory was astonishing and called for further investigation. Why did Einstein take it seriously? Because of the math. This is the detail that most people miss. To draw the Piri Reis map, you need to calculate longitude. In 1513, nobody could calculate longitude accurately. It requires a precise chronometer, which wasn't invented until the 1770s. Yet the Piri Reis map has accurate longitudes for the coast of South America and Africa. This is technically impossible for the 16th century. It would be like finding an iPhone in a tomb from the 1800s. So, how did a Turkish admiral possess technology from the future? He tells us the answer in the margins. Piri Reis admits he was a thief. He explicitly writes that he compiled this map using 20 older source charts, documents he called the Maps of the Ancient Kings. He was copying data from a lost library. He was holding the forbidden knowledge that the Vatican has spent centuries trying to suppress. This map proves that a global, advanced civilization existed during the Ice Age, a civilization that had the math to calculate longitude and the ships to map the poles. If that civilization existed, then the Church's entire timeline of history is a lie. Piri Reis let the secret slip out. But the next mapmaker made the mistake even worse. He didn't just draw the coast, he drew the mountains hidden inside the ice. In 1531, Oronce Finé published a map of the southern hemisphere. This was not a pirate chart scrawled in a tavern. Finé was a man of the establishment. He was the future royal chair of mathematics in Paris. He dedicated this map to Francis I, the King of France. This is critical. This was an official document. It was approved by the censors, approved by the crown, and approved by the church. And it shows the impossible. Where modern satellites show 2 miles of solid ice, Finé drew clear, distinct mountain ranges. For centuries, historians have tried to protect the official timeline by calling this a lucky guess. They say Finé was just filling in the blanks to balance the globe, and he happened to draw mountains where mountains actually exist. That is a lie, and it is a lazy one. In 1958, the International Geophysical Year conducted the first seismic survey of the Antarctic subglacial bedrock. They used sound waves to see through the ice. When you overlay that seismic data on top of Finé's doodle, the coincidence becomes mathematically impossible. He didn't just guess that there were mountains. He placed the ranges in the correct locations. He captured the correct orientation of the valleys, 427 years before radar existed. You can guess a shape. You cannot guess a topography. But the mountains aren't the smoking gun. The smoking gun is the water, the indentation on the map. Today, that location is the Ross Sea. In the modern world, the Ross Sea is not open water. It is home to the Ross Ice Shelf, a floating slab of glacial ice the size of France. It is a solid wall hundreds of feet thick. Finé drew it as an open bay. He drew rivers flowing from the interior mountains down into the ocean. This is the detail that the Vatican and the Smithsonian refuse to address. For those rivers to exist, Antarctica had to be warm, not slightly warmer. It had to be temperate. To map those river valleys, you would have to be standing there when the Ross Sea was liquid. Core samples from the Ross Sea confirm that roughly 6,000 years ago, rivers were depositing fine-grained sediment into an open ocean, exactly where Finé drew them. This creates a terrifying logic trap for the Church. If Oronce Finé was copying a map from 4000 BC, he was copying a document that predates the biblical flood. He was copying a document that predates the Vatican's entire timeline of civilized history. So why did the Church allow this map to be published? Because in 1531, they were arrogant. They saw Terra Australis and thought it was just new land waiting to be conquered by Christians. They didn't have the science to understand what they were looking at. They didn't know that the open rivers on that map proved the Earth was older than Genesis allowed. They thought they were showing off the future of exploration. In reality, they were publishing the receipt of a lost civilization. When the implications became clear, when they realized that this map proved a global, seafaring power existed while Adam was supposedly naming animals, they didn't burn the map. That would look suspicious. They did something more effective. They ridiculed it. They reclassified Oronce Finé from genius mathematician to imaginative artist. They turned the evidence into a myth. They taught you that Finé was creative, not accurate. Because if he was accurate, then the Church isn't the guardian of history. They are just the people hiding the truth about who was here before us. But the next mapmaker strips away the land itself to reveal the bedrock, and this time, the cover-up gets sloppy. While the Vatican was actively suppressing the truth about the frozen South, they were erasing the history of the North. In 1558, a map was published in Venice that became the single most hated document in the history of cartography: the Zeno map. It claims to be based on the travel logs of Niccolò and Antonio Zeno, two Venetian noblemen who sailed the North Atlantic in the 1380s. For 400 years, the academic establishment, built on the foundation of the Church's timeline, has called this map a fraud. They call it a cartographic crime. They claim the Zeno brothers were liars who invented islands to become famous. Why are they so aggressive? Why does this specific map trigger such a violent immune response from historians? Because it shows Friesland. The map depicts a massive, clearly defined island south of Iceland. It details the bays, the capes, and the topography of a landmass that simply does not exist. If you sail to those coordinates today, you will find nothing but open ocean. The Vatican and their approved historians used this error to discredit the entire map. They pointed to the empty water and said, "See, these men are hallucinating. Trust the Church's maps. Trust the Church's timeline." They successfully gaslit the world. They convinced us that Friesland was a phantom island. But in the 20th century, modern science stopped looking at the surface of the water and started looking at the floor. In the 1950s, oceanographers like Marie Tharp and the US Navy began mapping the North Atlantic seabed using sonar. They found the truth that the Vatican has been hiding. During the last ice age, sea levels were roughly 400 feet lower than they are today. If you drain the North Atlantic by 400 feet, which is exactly the condition of the world before the Great Melt, Friesland appears. It is not a myth. It is a submerged plateau on the ocean floor known today as the Faroe Bank. The shape of the underwater bank matches the shape of the island on the Zeno map. This changes the Zeno map from a hoax into a crime scene. This isn't a bad map drawn in the 1300s. It is a perfect map of the Ice Age, 10,000 years before submarines existed. It depicts the North Atlantic exactly as it looked before the meltwater pulse drowned the coastlines. This creates a paradox that the Church cannot solve. If the Zeno map is accurate, it means the original source charts were drawn before the ocean rose. It means someone was surveying the North Atlantic with high-precision instruments thousands of years ago. The Zeno brothers didn't draw this from scratch. They were compilers. They found these charts in the archives of Venice, archives that the Church had absolute access to. The Vatican knew about Friesland. They knew about the drowned lands, but they had a choice to make. They could admit that the timeline of history is wrong and that a sophisticated civilization existed before the flood, or they could destroy the credibility of the map. They chose to destroy the map. They taught the world that Friesland was a mistake. They turned the evidence of a lost civilization into a joke about bad sailors. But the Zeno map has one more secret that proves it wasn't a guess: Greenland. Look at how the map depicts Greenland. It doesn't show it as a giant continent. It shows it as 3 distinct islands squeezed together. In the 1940s, French polar explorer Paul-Émile Victor was stunned by this. He knew that the ice sheet on Greenland is thousands of feet thick. To the naked eye, it looks like one landmass, but the Zeno map shows 3. 10 years later, seismic surveys confirmed it. Underneath the ice, Greenland is an archipelago of 3 main islands. The Vatican held the accurate map of the planet. They knew the North was drowned. They knew the ice was hiding the truth. But the next map brings the glitch right to their doorstep. It proves they didn't just hide the poles. They hid the history of Europe itself. The Vatican could claim ignorance about Antarctica, but they cannot claim ignorance about the Mediterranean. This is the map of Ibn Ben Zara. It was discovered in Alexandria, Egypt. It is dated 1487. To the untrained eye, it looks like a standard portolan chart, a navigational map used by sailors in the Middle Ages. It is incredibly detailed. But when you zoom in on the specific geography of Europe, the map becomes an impossibility. It shows islands in the Aegean Sea that do not exist today. For centuries, historians used the Vatican defense. They claimed Ibn Ben Zara was a sloppy artist who was just adding islands to make the map look pretty. They dismissed the data as decoration. But then, geologists looked at the coordinates of the fake islands. They aren't fake. They are the mountain peaks of a landmass that was submerged when the Mediterranean Sea rose at the end of the last ice age. Ben Zara depicts the Aegean coastline as it looked 10,000 years ago, 8,000 years before Magellan was born. But the detail that ruins the official history is in the north. Look at Britain. Look at Ireland. The map depicts glaciers. It shows massive glacier tracks cutting through the center of England. It shows river deltas in Ireland that simply do not exist today. Geologically, those deltas only exist when the ice sheet is actively melting. This map is dated 1487. In 1487, King Henry VII was on the throne of England. There were no glaciers. The climate was similar to today. So how does a map from 1487 depict the ice sheets of the Paleolithic era? Ben Zara didn't draw this from life. He wasn't looking out his window. He was copying. He was a copyist in Alexandria, preserving a document that had survived the burning of the Great Library. He was copying a map that was drawn when Europe was frozen. This is the map that proves the Vatican is lying about the Dark Ages. The Church teaches that before the Greeks and Romans, Europe was a primitive wilderness. They teach that we climbed out of the mud and slowly invented civilization. But this map proves that someone was surveying the coastlines of Europe with mathematical precision during the Ice Age. They were sailing the Mediterranean when the sea level was lower. They were charting the glaciers of Britain while the ice was still there. The final map doesn't just show a place, it shows the connection, and it destroys the Church's entire narrative of the New World. In 1559, a Turkish cartographer named Hadji Ahmed published a map of the world that is technically impossible. It is stunningly accurate. It shows the distinct shape of the North American coastline, a coastline that European explorers supposedly hadn't fully mapped yet. But look at the top left corner. Look at where Alaska meets Russia. Today we know this as the Bering Strait. It is 50 miles of open ocean separating the continents. But Hadji Ahmed didn't draw an ocean. He drew a massive land bridge. He depicts a solid, wide connection between Asia and North America. This is the kill shot for the official timeline. Geologists call this Beringia. We know for a fact that this land bridge existed. It was the highway that allowed humans to migrate into the Americas. But here is the problem. It collapsed into the ocean at the end of the last ice age. The rising seas swallowed it roughly 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years before the pyramids were built. So how did a cartographer in 1559 know it was there? He wasn't guessing. You don't guess a land bridge that has been underwater for 10 millennia. He was copying the travel logs of a civilization that could walk from Russia to Alaska. This is the secret the Vatican has been protecting with its life. The Church teaches that the Americas were isolated, that they were a new world discovered by Europeans blessed by God. But this map proves that the world was fully connected. It proves that ancient man didn't just sit in caves, they mapped the global highway between the East and the West. The Vatican knew this. They had the Hadji Ahmed source maps in the archives. They had the Piri Reis source maps in the library. And they used them. This is the darkest part of the story. The Church didn't hide these maps because they were useless myths. They hid them because they were weapons. They used the Piri Reis map to guide Columbus to the Americas. They used the ancient charts to navigate the Pacific. They used the knowledge of the land bridge to understand the migration of souls they needed to convert. They built the greatest empire in human history by standing on the shoulders of the civilization they erased. They burned the library of the ancients, but they kept the atlas for themselves. The Vatican didn't hide these maps because they were myths. They hid them because they were the instruction manual for conquering a world that had already been mapped. We are not the first advanced civilization to walk this earth. The Vatican knows this. They've always known this, and they're still hiding the evidence today. So every time you walk into a museum and see a timeline that starts with primitive hunter-gatherers, remember, you're looking at propaganda designed to make you forget that we are the second act, not the first. The only question that matters now is simple. If they lied about the maps, what else are they lying about? And more importantly, what are they still hiding in those archives?